A very warm and hearty good day to all of you. My name is Ramanpreet Kaur Bhatia. I'm a chartered accountant from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, a certified practicing accountant from CPA Australia, and a distinguished Toastmaster from Toastmasters International. In this video, I'll be talking about the concept of industry operational environment analysis. This is basically the analysis of 5 forces that were defined by Michael Porter. We'll be talking about each and every factor, and in the end, we'll be using the summarization technique for the industry environment analysis by using these 5 forces given by Porter. I hope all of you will find some value in today's video. Industry operational environment analysis. In our past few videos, we defined the industry. We defined the value chain of the industry. We defined the industry segmentation. We also learned about different stages of industry life cycle. And so now we know all the definitions. We also studied about how to analyze the remote environment of an industry, basically those factors which are beyond our control. In this video, we'll be talking about industry's operational environment analysis. Now, what is the difference between the remote environment and the operational environment? Remote environment is that environment which is just beyond our control. Although the operational environment is also beyond our control, but we can just have a look, we can just analyze the forces which control this operational environment, and we can make our strategy based on that analysis. So that is industry's operational environment, which basically consists of our suppliers, our buyers, our competitors. So all these factors in together, they form the operational environment analysis. Once we have done the remote environment analysis to determine the current situation and future growth potential of the industry, the second step that a leader faces or a CPA faces is to analyze the industry to determine its profitability. So for that, we resort to industry environment analysis, also known as Porter's analysis. Now, what is the aim of this industry environment analysis? There are 3 basic aims that we need to keep in mind. These are, what are the forces within the industry which determine the profitability of the industry? Based on those forces, the current and expected future profitability of the industry, and how the forces are changing and how are they expected to change over time. So these are basically 3 aims why we are doing industry analysis. We want to understand those factors which affect the profitability of the industry, how these forces have done in the past and how are they changing, what is the current scenario and how are they going to affect us in future, right? So we have to understand these 3 basic aims and then we have to move forward. So this analysis was basically given by Michael Porter. He found out that by analyzing the 5 causes, consistent difference in the industry profitability could be explained. Also, as well as analyzing the level of current profitability, this 5 force analysis can be used to understand the likely changes that will occur in the industry, the expected level of future profitability. For example, an industry may have many competitors. So there is low profitability. But when the competitors are merging or leaving the industry, it is likely to become much more profitable in the medium term. Here we are not talking about the long term, we are talking about the medium term. But when we did the remote environment analysis, we always talked about long term. Also, we have to understand that all these 5 forces will have different importance in any particular industry. For some industry, one force would be more important. Maybe for some other industry, the other factor is more important, right? So this we have to analyze and we have to judge as per our experience. But one thing which is common in all these factors is that they reflect competitive behavior, the psychological makeup, and the values of the organization. In general, lower the impact of forces, higher is the profitability. So one thing that we have to keep in mind is the thumb rule of this analysis, of Michael Porter's analysis of 5 forces. Lower the impact of these forces, higher the profitability, and higher the impact of these forces, lower the profitability. So that is inversely proportional. If the force of factor is high, my profitability will reduce. If the force of factor is low, my profitability will increase. So that is how we go for industry environment analysis. Now, what are the factors that Michael Porter has given us which shape an industry's profitability? We do this analysis through the 5 forces which were prescribed by Michael Porter. What are the conclusions that we draw from this analysis? If all the forces, again, I'll be repeating, if all the forces on the industry are considered to be high, industry is not profitable. The profitability level of industry is low. So if I am a new entrant in this industry, I will make a decision. Do not enter this low profitable industry. But what happens if I am already involved in this industry? If I am new, of course, I have judged the profitability of the industry. It's not profitable. I will make a decision not to enter. But if I'm already inside, I'm already involved in the industry, then as a leader, I go on analyzing each of these 5 forces, each of these 5 factors. Accordingly, I'll be making some strategic decisions, because as a leader, we try and balance out these factors so that we remain profitable. What are these 5 forces? Threat of new entrants, power of supplier, power of buyer, power of substitute, and intensity of industry rivalry. We'll get to know all this when we understand these 5 forces in depth. So let's start with our first factor, which is the threat of new entrants. When the overall volume and value of industry is small, it may not be attractive to new entrants, as there is insufficient size to allow a new competitor to enter and gain market share from existing companies, from existing competitors. The overall market is very low. The market share is very low. So even if I'm going to enter, the insufficient size of the industry will not help me in making more profits. Right. So that is the first factor. That is the first, you can say the first factor which affects the threat of new entrants. The second one is, if the economies of scale cannot be achieved, the new entrants will not enter the industry. Then the big companies have more resources. They can produce it in large scales. They can achieve those economies of scale. They can make some advantages because of economies of scale. Their cost of production is low because they're producing in large quantities. Hence, only big companies in this case can enter the market. Right? Because when you want to enter, you want to make some profits. How will you make those profits if your cost of production is low? When will you enjoy the low cost of production? If you're producing in huge quantities. Right? So that is called the economies of scale. New entrants with little market share will not enjoy the cost advantage of those already enjoyed by the established competitors. Industries dominated by branded products are difficult to enter due to large amounts of money and time required to create a competing branded product. If the brand is well established, if there are trademarks, then it is difficult to secure the shelf space in retail outlets. It is difficult to capture sales. However, if there is no loyalty to brand, then it is easier to enter. If I, as a consumer, prefer brand A, I will definitely go and buy the brand A only, because this brand A is available in all the supermarkets in my area where I live. Now, if a new company, if a new small company wants to enter this market, then that company has to compete with this brand A, and this brand A already enjoys loyalty among consumers. If the new entrant is not able to match up to that standard, not able to get that loyalty, it is very difficult to survive. Therefore, but if there is no loyalty to brand, then it is easier to enter. The next point is if there are patents or if there are trademarks, or if there is any other type of intellectual property theft created for my product, the new competitors will have a limitation, because then they cannot copy my product. I have some exclusive rights for my products. Other people cannot copy, right? So that will be a deterrent to them to enter the market. The next point is if the capital requirement is big, then it is difficult to enter. If I know to enter in this particular industry, I have to invest a lot. But I am a small organization, I may not be able to afford that investment. For example, in airlines industry or say in pharmaceutical industries, it is very difficult to enter because there is huge cost involved. On our end, maybe because I have to do invest in lots of research and development. Or maybe in case of airlines, the cost of production of planes is too high. So the capital requirement is big. Only if I have that much big reserve with me, only if I have that large reserve of resources with me, then only I can enter. So that is usually also one of the deterrents for the entry of new entrants. Next is if the switching cost is high for the buyer to switch on to new product, then the new competitors will face a barrier to enter. The competition. Why does this happen? Why? Because in many cases, the customers have already committed to the current competitor's product. So for a customer, there is very high cost of change into alternatives. An example is the installation of a specific kind of software, such as, say, Apple or Windows, or obtaining a complete system from one supplier where after sale services are guaranteed. Right? So in that case, changing the components has implication other than cost. We want convenience. As a consumer, we want convenience. So if I'm comfortable with my present product, and if the cost of my switching over to another product is higher for me, why will I do it? I will not switch. So if that switching cost for the buyer is high, then the threat for the new entrants, the threat of new entrants would be less. Next, we can analyze that the new entrants may have difficulty distributing their goods and services through established distribution channels, as those have already been locked by the existing customers. For example, some distribution policies, such as KFC, they provide only half Pepsi soft drinks available, or they have the space allocated to them in supermarkets, where well-known brands are given priority. So in that case, as a new entrant, I am not able to get that distribution channel. I am not able to present my goods to my ultimate consumers. My logistics, my distribution channel is not that strong. My distribution channel is very limited. So that is a barrier. The next, government policy. Government policies may restrict new entrants through licensing restrictions and their policies. Industries where permits and licenses are required to establish production tend to have very limited entry. The module gives us an example where limited licenses are issued in Australia to telecommunications, to radio, to TV broadcasting, and taxis. So that's why there are very limited number of channels which come in Australia. So those industries where there is very rigid industry standards, the new entrant will think twice whether it should enter, whether the policies are in favor of its entry or not. So all these factors in together affect the threat of new entrants. I have to analyze what is the trend. I have to analyze the profitability of the industry on the basis of this particular threat. And based on this, I will be making my strategy. Now, in the next slide, we are just seeing the checklist for threat of new entrants. This is basically a summarization of all those points which we just now discussed. Size of industry, government policy, compliances, capital requirement, economies of scale, specific qualifications, intellectual property, brand, switching costs, technology, help for buyers. Right. So this is basically a summarization of threat of new entrants analysis factor. Now we are going to analyze the second factor described by Michael Porter, which is the power of suppliers. If the supplier has monopoly or there are very few suppliers in the industry, supplier power is high. Why? Because the supplier is selling to many customers, such as in supermarket retailing or chocolate confectionery manufacturing. Right? There are very few suppliers in the industry, but the demand is huge. People are coming, people want my product. There are very few suppliers. Now, since there are very few of us, we can just put our own conditions for sale to those customers. Right. The second one is if the product or service which is being sold by supplier is unique. As a consumer, I want to buy that product which is unique, which is differentiated, which is different from the products that are being sold in the market right now. The product is exclusive. Definitely, I will have to buy that product on the terms of supplier. Right. So if my product is unique, definitely the person who is selling that product will put his own terms and conditions and he will enjoy a higher power. The next one is if there is high concentration. Now, what do you mean by high concentration? High concentration means lots of buyers, but very few suppliers. This is in fact just a modification of the first point that we did. If there are very few suppliers, the supplier power is definitely higher. Right. The next point is if it is difficult for a buyer to switch from one supplier to another, then the buyer will continue with the old supplier. This is this point we did in when we studied the threat of new entrants also. Why? Because if my switching cost from one supplier to another supplier is more, maybe if I can save some, say the switching cost in itself amounts to $10, but I want to save those $10. So I will not switch from one supplier to another supplier. I'll continue with supplier one. In that case, supplier one will have greater power. Right? We already saw the example of software companies. So it is very difficult to switch from one software to another. It's not that easy. So the switching cost for the buyer is high. Right? The next is if there are no substitutes available, I have to go to a particular supplier to buy my product. The supplier will sell on his own terms and conditions. So the power of supplier is high. The next one is forward integration. If the supplier can forward integrate, which means that instead of selling to an organization, the supplier directly goes to the ultimate consumer. The supplier power will become high. In this case, just recall that forward integration, the concept of forward integration and backward integration that we studied in one of our last videos. What is forward integration? I am skipping the next step of the value chain. I am just overlapping that step. I am assuming the function of the next step. right? I'm totally eliminating the next step of the value chain. So if a wholesaler does not supply to a retailer, but it goes directly to the ultimate consumer, his power will increase. The power of wholesaler, the power of supplier will increase. So if the supplier is able to forward integrate, his power will be high. Next point is, if I'm buying some product from a supplier in very less quantities. Say I only buy 1 kg of a product from a supplier, and that supplier usually sells about 1000 kgs in a day. So the fraction of purchase that I am doing from that supplier is very less. It will not affect the supplier if I buy or do not buy from him, because my purchase is very limited. So why should the supplier listen to me? In that case, his power is more. If I'm buying in very less quantities, the power of supplier increases. If the supplier has an exclusive distribution channel, now this point is coming again and again, then it can control the buyer supplier power rule. Again, the example of this is certain shelves are reserved exclusively for some suppliers in supermarkets. For example, we want to purchase a toothpaste and we go to a supermarket and we know that the entire shelf is filled with Colgate brand only. I'm not going to find any other brand. That means Colgate has a very good distribution channel. So in that case, the power of the supplier who is distributing Colgate, his power will increase, because knowingly or unknowingly, I'll be buying only Colgate because that is what is available in front of me. That is what is available in whichever supermarket I go to, whichever place I shop from. So these are some of the circumstances where the supplier power is high. Remember the thumb rule: if the supplier power is high, then the profitability of industry is less. Right? And if the supplier power is low, the profitability is more. So we have to remember this point. Now again, this is the checklist for the power of supplier, which is just the same. The number and concentration of suppliers, how important are specific suppliers' input, how likely supplier is likely to forward integrate, how easily can organization in the industry switch suppliers, what is the proportion of the cost of supplier's product relative to the total cost of the industry product, is information about suppliers' product available, which is the distribution? How profitable are suppliers? Does technology exist that will impact the power of supplier? Right, so this is just a checklist. This is just a summarization of all the points that we did for this force. Now we are going to the third force, which is the power of buyers. Now, I am an organization and all my customers are my buyers. What are the circumstances in which the buyer's power is high? The first one, if my product is just normal, just an average product, my buyers can leave me anytime and they are free to go anywhere and buy from any place where they get good quality product or a unique product. So therefore, in this case, the buyer power is high. If my product is just normal, the power of buyer is high. The second point is, if there are lots of substitutes available for my products, buyer can go anywhere and buy any substitute for my product. So in that case, buyer's power is high. For example, in case of shampoos, there are so many substitutes available. As a buyer, I can choose whatever product suits my hair. Now, since I have a chance of losing the buyer, I need to upgrade my quality, because there are lots of substitutes available if my product quality is not good. If my pricing is not right, buyer can easily leave me and pick and buy another product. So the buyer's power is high if there are lots of substitutes available. Next point is, if the buyer buys large share of my product, then that buyer is important for me. His power is high. Again, we can quote the example which we did for the power of supplier. That is, if the buyer is buying about, now say, 600 kgs out of the 1000 kgs that I'm selling in a day, That means the buyer is buying a large share of my product. Buyer is buying a large share of my total sales during the day. That buyer is important for me. I cannot let go that buyer. The power of buyer becomes high in that case. If the buyer buys large share of my product, his power increases. Next is if the buyer's switching cost is low, he can easily leave me and go anywhere else. His power is high in that case. We can take an example of office supplies. They're easy to find. I'm buying some products from one shop, but there are so many other shops available that I can easily go to and buy that product. My switching cost is very low. So the power of my buyer is high in that case. Next one is if the buyer can backward integrate. For supplier, we said if the supplier can forward integrate, his power is high. For a buyer, we say that if the buyer can backward integrate, his power is high. What is backward integration? Again, recall that concept of forward and backward integration, which means instead of buying from me, the buyer starts making the product himself. The buyer is just overlapping the previous step of the value chain. Then he'll be more powerful and he'll be more independent. An example for that would be a paper mill, which could own its own forest plantation and therefore be able to produce its own raw materials, right? So again, integrating in a backward position, I am overlapping the last step of the value chain. I am overtaking that large step of the value chain, right? So if the buyer can backward integrate, he is more powerful. The next one is if my product is costly for the customer, definitely he's going to bargain with me, or else he will go to another shop. Buyer power is high in that case because the buyer is going to negotiate for the best deal available and he will have an incentive to shop around. And last but not the least, there are very few buyers in the industry as compared to seller. Definitely, the buyer's power is high. The buyers are very few, sellers are so many. The buyer can choose whichever seller he wants to go, right? So in that case, the power of buyer is definitely high. For example, there are very few supermarkets compared with the food industry, the manufacturers. So the supermarket buyers will have more power over industry. There are so many manufacturers who are working in the food industry, but when they are supplying goods, they are supplying to the ultimate consumers through supermarkets, and those supermarkets are very few, right? So the buyers will have more power in that case. Now we'll just summarize the checklist for consideration on power of buyers. How concentrated are the buyers in the industry? Is distribution controlled by a few important outlets? Are there any alternative channels to distribution? What impact does the producer or service being purchased by the buyer have on their business? How likely are the buyers to backward integrate? How easy or difficult is it for buyers to switch to alternative suppliers? How important my industry volume is to the buyers? And what is the proportion of cost of the industry product being purchased relative to other products or services the buyer buys? So that is a complete checklist if we want to understand the power of buyers. So this was our third factor given by Michael Porter. Now we'll go to the next factor, which is the power of substitutes. Products, what are direct substitutes? Products and services that can be used instead of the product or services of a particular industry. Right, so those are my substitutes. For example, if I do investments in large stockbroking industry, what is my substitute? What is my basic purpose? To invest. Now, if I'm not investing in the local stockbroking industry, where else can I invest? I can invest in property or gold. I can go to financial planners, or maybe I am not investing in my local industry, I'll go international, and I'm dealing only with the international brokers, and I'm investing only in international stocks. So these are substitutes, right? We just now we studied about the power of buyers. If there are a large number of substitutes available, the power of buyer is high, because the buyer has a choice wherever he can switch over, right? Also, it is closely linked to the industry definition that the organization uses. Study the example which is given in the module. It says that if I'm operating in an Australian fast food industry organization, providing fast food alternatives will be considered as competition. If I'm selling pizza, say if I'm selling pizza, all other outlets which are selling the substitute for pizza, not pizza, fast food, they will be considered as my substitutes. They will be considered as my competition, say hamburger or chips, right? Because what are the substitutes? In this case, this will be the alternatives to pizza, alternatives of fast food. Now, if I take a narrow view of my industry, if I'm selling pizza, I will consider only those organizations as my competition who are selling pizza only, right? So they are not, so the organization selling hamburger or chips will not be considered as, will be considered as my substitutes. They're not my competitors, but they are my substitutes. An organization selling pizza is my competitor, but an organization selling hamburgers or chips will be substitute for my product. Therefore, it's very important for an organization that it should be aware of the substitutes which are available to the customers, so that they are aware of the industry trends and use this for planning process. What we just now talked about is the direct substitutes. Now there are some indirect substitutes. Not all substitutes are direct. What are indirect substitutes? They are very difficult to determine. They are very difficult to locate. Why? Because these items are not direct substitutes. They are competing for a share of your available dollars. For example, that I have used here is, I have say $200. Now my option to spend that money is either I go for a weekend, or I buy appliances, or I paint my house, or I enroll for a course. Nothing in this list is direct substitute, or they, or in competition, or the products. If I want to go for a weekend, buying an appliance is not a substitute for that, not a direct substitute, but it's an indirect substitute, right? I can either spend $200 for going on weekends, or I can buy an appliance. Not direct substitutes, indirect substitutes, but still they are giving me competition. So how can what is the strategy that the organization used to avoid this indirect substitution? This is product bundling. Now, what is product bundling? Product bundling makes it more difficult for consumer to directly compare one product with another, and therefore the companies are very clever. They bundle two products which are not substitutes to each other, but they can be complementary to each other. They bundle it together, and then they make it available to the consumer. For example, banks, they often prompt consumers to open the account. Then they will give a free car loan, or they will give a free net banking services, or they will give free mortgages, interest-free loans. That is product bundling. So that a consumer gets so much involved in this that he forgets, that he does not go to the competitor. So product bundling is one such technique which is used by the sellers to just counterfeit the power of substitutes. Now, what is the checklist for power of substitutes? Are there equivalent prices and performance product available? Is there new technology offering the same benefit to customers? How easy or difficult is it for customers to switch from industry products to a substitute? Does technology exist that will improve the position of substitutes? Now, if you all remember, when we did the remote environment analysis, we studied about the technological factors. And we also said that the fact of technology is present everywhere in the industry. Whichever factor we go to, either we do the analysis of remote environment, or we do the analysis of industry's operational behavior. Whichever force we are analyzing, this technology is prevalent in all the factors. So this point will be there, which will be common. The next one we have is power of complements. Complements include products and services that add value to your industry. Why is this important? Because understanding what complements your industry now and in the future helps us to strengthen and protect our competitive position. Classic example of this power of complement is to understand the working of Apple. All of us are using Apple products now. Now, what is the reason for Apple's success? Apple continued to own their operating system, protect their profitability. And so they have continued the same approach in relation to smartphone industry also. We all know, we all have been using iPhones, and we know the success of iPhone is largely dependent on the success of apps that are developed to use along with the use of the Apple phones. It's an example of complementary product. Apple's ownership and protection of its operating systems, Apple's relationship with app developers, and the development of integrated interfaces. All this is known as Apple ecosystem. We know that we are using Apple phone. It can be connected to the Apple Watch. It can be connected to Apple iPad. It can be connected to Apple MacBook. All this is complementary. The products are not substitutes, but they're complementing each other. They are working within an ecosystem. Interdependence among the players, and also evolutionary nature of this. So if I understand this entire ecosystem, if I understand this power of complements, I can make the best strategic decision on how to create my value within my ecosystem. Now, also we can do the checklist that there products or services that increase the value within the industry? Is there differentiation in the complementary products? Can the complementary products be used to strengthen your position in the industry? Is your position protected long term? And again, the technology part, does technology exist that will enable complements to impact on the industry? The last point now we are going to do is the intensity of industry rivalry. Intensity of industry rivalry is the degree of competitiveness. This is found between existing industry competitors. Now, this is different from the first factor that we did, which was the threat of new entrants. I'm not making an entry into the industry, but I'm still existing in the industry. I'm dealing with the rivalry. The competitors are already working in the industry. What happens here is the action by one firm may generate a reaction from other competitors. For example, if we talk about airlines industry, if one airline is offering discount, similar attempts will be made by competitive firms. Right? There are some factors which may increase or decrease this intensity, and we'll just examine these points. The first one is, if there are more competitors in the industry, then there will be higher intensity. Of course, that is given. If the growth rate or profitability is going down, that means to earn the same amount of money, I have to sell more. That means I have to do more competition with my competitors. This means increased rivalry. If my fixed cost is high, to cover that fixed cost, I will have to compete more. Industry rivalry will high. If I want more market share, I will increase my capacity to produce more. I will produce more, I will try to sell more. And now in all this process, the competition is increased. The industry rivalry is increased. The next is government regulations. pressure on industry or competition. The government policies could be in favor of some industries and they might be unfavorable for other industries. So they can have a distorting effects on how well an industry can compete with us. The next point and the last point is exit barrier. If there is an exit barrier, I cannot leave the industry. My organization cannot leave if there is an existing exit barrier. I have to stay back. I have to be in the competition. I have to fight. I have to compete. So in that case, there will be more industry rivalry. What are these exit barriers? We can give the example of three kind of exit barriers. If I've invested in a specialized equipment, if I have made a heavy investment in a high cost equipment and this equipment cannot be readily used in other industry, I will have to stay back for the sake of that investment. The second is, if I have a specialized skill that cannot be easily used in other industry, this is a barrier to my exit. As a chartered accountant, we learn so many skills while studying. We learn taxation, we learn auditing, we learn cost management, we learn financial accounting, we learn the IT skills, we learn the company laws. We learn all other different kind of laws. So we have those skills. If we leave the accounting part, maybe we can become the taxation expert. If we leave the taxation part, maybe we can become the IT expert. Right? So there is no exit barrier for us. But for some industries, if you have a specialized skill which is best suited to only one kind of industry, you will never think of leaving that industry and going elsewhere because you do not have that skill to go elsewhere. This is an exit barrier. And the third one is again the same, which is the high fixed cost. High levels of fixed cost will increase the firm's willingness to utilize capacity and thereby increasing rivalry. But yes, one thing is sure, that if my product is unique, my product is differentiated, then no one can do any harm to me. Even if there is high competition, I will be staying back. The industry rivalry will not affect my organization much. And we can say that in industry where growth is high, product is differentiated, and there are very few competitors, it is unlikely that the rivalry is high. But yes, a proper analysis is definitely important. So this is a checklist for the intensity of industry rivalry, basically summarization of all the points that we have just now learned. The next one, we go to the summarization of Porter's 5-force analysis on industry profitability. Now, we have studied all these 5 forces. These 5 forces interact to determine the effectiveness of the industry. The strongest force becomes the dominant factor in determining the profitability. And hence, what is the ultimate result? It can affect our strategy formulation. As we did in steeple analysis, if you all remember, for each of these forces considered here for industry analysis, we can conclude that whether the power of these factors is high, average, or low. If all the forces are related as high, we just have to remember the thumb rule, the profitability is low. On the other hand, if the forces are related as low, industry profitability should be high. So the effect of forces and the profitability are inversely proportional. This approach, this summarizing approach, is based on an assumption that there is some sense of average industry profitability. Right. But in our case, we need solid proof. We need solid evidence. We need a proper analysis of these factors to make this current summarization. So we need to have information, a sound proof of all this, the effect of these forces. So it is important that we do the summarization. Now, the desirable level of industry profitability might be thought of as being a combination of what? My return covering risk, real return for the country in which operation exists, and that is almost say 0 to 5%. So that I should be getting this is my return of investment is a combination of risk-free real return 0 to 5%, return for expected inflation, which is typically between 2 to 5%, plus a return for the risk involved in the industry, usually between 2 to 8% per annum. Overall, the industry profitability should lie in the range of 4 to 18%, depending then, of course, we can just say that the impact of all these factors, an average of about, say, 10% per annum. However, we should be cautious that in any industry with high or low profitability, it does not equate to all organizations being equal. So as a cautious leader, we should know that an organization's profitability should be assessed within the context of industry profitability, and only after the industry profitability has been calculated or assessed. For example, there could be an instance where the organization is good. The organization is a good performer, but that organization is working in an unprofitable industry. So overall, the profitability is low, right? And the last part that we have to do now is the role of leaders in analyzing the profitability of the industry. Why do we know it? Why do we need to do this analysis? To balance out the forces which determine the profitability. If we know what is the relative importance of each factor, we can try and adjust that factor to strengthen the capabilities of the organization and to do a proper future planning. So it is for these reasons that we as leaders should analyze these 5 forces which were given by Porter. Now, the purpose of this whole analysis is to understand whether this industry is attractive for future investments. Should the new competitors enter the industry because there is attractiveness of profitability, or should my organization exit because the industry is not profitable? And based on this overall summary, we'll make a strategy. We'll make the strategic decision. There is an example given in the book, which is example number 2.9. It deals with the 5 force analysis for the Australian architectural and decorative branded paint industry. And this example gives an overall summary: the threat of new entrants, supplier, buyer, substitute, industry rivalry. On the basis of that, it makes a projection about future profitability. I suggest all of you go through these 5 forces analysis once again and then attempt this example so that the whole concept is much more clearer. That's all for this video. I hope you all have found some value in this video. In next video, I'll be talking about other important, the residual topics of module 2, and we'll be finishing module 2. We'll be covering the topics of what is market segmentation, what is strategic competition, basis of competition, industry success factors, competitor analysis. And with that, our module 2 will be finished and we'll be proceeding to other important topics in module 3 afterwards. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much.